Good evening, and welcome to the October 15th, 2018 meeting of the Merrimack School Board. If you could please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. And I'll remember on time this time that Vice Chair Andy Schneider is excused from tonight's meeting. We hope his business travel is fruitful. On to item number 2, which is public participation. Anyone from the public that'd like to speak, please state your name and address for the record. Seeing none, we will close public participation. We will go on to item number 3, which is additional information regarding the Honeywell Phase 5 proposed project. And I invite from Honeywell, Jim Lucy and Wally Howe. Great, we'd be glad to take your handouts. Is it glowing?
Oh.
Yeah, there it is. You're glowing now.
Okay, yeah, it is now.
Thank you.
Two more. I provided that with a paper clip, candidly, for two reasons. One, my stapler wasn't long enough, but I figured as we go through this, it'll be easier to separate some pages, so I apologize if that's inconvenient. I did want to introduce, before we get going, another Honeywell person that's here, Gary King, to Wally's right. Gary lives locally. He's our project manager. He's worked with the district on all work that we've done for all phases to date, and he's very familiar with your buildings. He's been very helpful in putting together the analysis that we'll share with you tonight, so I did want to highlight Gary's presence. So once again, we appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you. The purpose of tonight is really to follow up on our July 16th last meeting with you. I believe it was your first board meeting, and since then, in that discussion, you had provided us the approval to go ahead and do an evaluation, an engineering study of the facility to evaluate all of your schools for primarily ventilation upgrades, upgrades to equipment at the end of its useful life associated with heating and ventilating and air conditioning, controls that are associated with those systems like thermostats, valves, and sensors and different things that are in your buildings. And then also we evaluated a couple of energy efficiency items that we'll talk about here in a minute. I've stayed with a fairly consistent format of the presentation of what you had seen the last time. The intent tonight is to give you the scope of work that we identified, which is largely similar to what we had identified before, but we've got more certainty around it, to give you an idea of the costs of the work from a budgetary standpoint, operating cost impacts in terms of savings or cost increases. So the goal here is to give you enough information for you to evaluate that and consider any next steps you might want to consider in the budgeting process. So we encourage questions at any time. Wally and Gary are here to support me with any questions you might have, and we will also be available at subsequent meetings after you have a chance to digest this to give you whatever follow-up information you'd like to have or dig into whatever details. I'm providing you tonight a summary presentation. There's a write-up that would go into detail around some of the scope of work in more specificity that will provide Marge and Matt at the conclusion of this meeting. And again, we'll be happy to be available for follow-up. So we just wanted to kind of walk through the process that we followed since the last discussion, some of the steps that we did. I want to go over the scope of work, and then we want to get into some of the financial summaries. Again, if you have questions, ask away at any time. So first and foremost, if you go to page 2, left-hand corner is where the page numbers are. The basis of this effort is consistent with the efforts that we did from phase 1 forward. So it was really to do a comprehensive evaluation of your buildings to evaluate ways that we can self-fund capital improvements from an area of your operating budget that, you know, in a perfect world should be out of sight, out of mind. Your buildings are there to provide the most optimal environment for students to learn in the most conducive way. And so it's really to look at the energy infrastructure we defined before, areas within your buildings that you're spending money on electric and natural gas in your buildings, moving parts or areas of the buildings that affect those cost centers. And that's the area that we evaluate here. So how do we look at basically updating a comprehensive plan that we started in '07 to current, evaluating those systems of opportunities to reduce costs further and upgrade that equipment. The intent here, as we did before, is trying to find ways that we can self-fund that for your consideration out of your existing budget. So we looked at areas of impacts, the reductions of the energy costs, tangible operating costs. How do we get some third-party money in terms of utility rebates to help offset costs? Those have been identified. And then in this case, you have some existing debt from prior phases with us that we could look at refinancing and reinvesting out of existing budgeted money to offset some of these improvements. The main focus here, as we've talked before, is really how we upgrade infrastructure that's at or beyond the end of its useful life. And so that, in theory, would allow you to address some things that help with that learning environment, as well as help stabilize future capital improvement needs. So from an audit study overview, we really evaluated 3 primary areas: your heating, ventilating, and air conditioning system and its controls, the condition of it or the lack thereof in some of your buildings. We looked at 2 energy conservation measures, LED lighting conversion, and we looked at some building weatherization improvements in your buildings. The latter one we evaluated, and we didn't feel like there was enough there to really make sense to bring forward the recommendation. So the 2 primary scope items that we're focused on is the HVAC upgrades as well as the LED conversion. The LED conversion in its proposal can be pretty simply defined as any one of your schools, whether it's an interior or an exterior light, whether it's a low runtime application like a closet or a boiler room, or high runtime application like a hallway or a classroom, all of your lights would be converted to new LED technology with controls. So we would get rid of all fluorescent-based technology that's in your buildings, and that allows you to substantially reduce electric costs and improve light output. And so that, in short, is the proposal for that. Those details will be provided in a subsequent document. And there's a list of tasks that we completed. So there's kind of 4 primary things that I wanted to highlight. First thing we did is we wanted to update the energy usage and cost baseline. We've worked with the district a number of years, and we collect bills from Matt's department, but we really went through a renewed effort to make sure we had updated current information. So when we make calculations of things, it's based upon your actual cost and your actual usage. So that was one item that we've evaluated and completed. The next one was to do a detailed evaluation of all your buildings in an intensified ways with subject matter experts for each area. So that's subject matter experts for HVAC and lighting and building envelope in this case. So we had a team of people go through your buildings. 2 of them are included behind you. One primary person who's not here tonight, his name's Bob Marcotte. He also went through, and some other folks. We work with Matt's team and Tom Tuso to make sure we were not only providing awareness that we were going to be in the buildings, but provided guidance around some areas of need and improvement. So that was all accounted for. And then we spent a fair amount of time gathering the data that we had and doing preliminary engineering, scoping of improvements to really result in the estimates that we have to share with you tonight in the upgrades. And we also had a discussion at the last meeting about the feasibility of air conditioning. And so we looked at that as well. In short, it can be a fairly long conversation, but Matt was right when he said at the last meeting, the best solution that we found for air conditioning is not so much to incorporate it into the new upgrades. We found it to be cheaper and more cost-effective to put in separate air conditioning systems where applicable. As a rule of thumb, again, general rule of thumb, you could air condition any classroom space in probably a $13,000 to $16,000 range. We would recommend that it would make the most sense to put separate systems in as opposed to a combination system where we're doing it. Part of the reason for that is when you work with existing buildings, you have to think of how much space above the ceiling, how many floors do you have. It's much different than the middle school in '04 when you designed it from scratch. So it drove us to the conclusion that a separate system, similar to how Matt has installed some in some individual locations, would make the most sense. So that air conditioning piece is there for advisement. It's not part of our overall solution that we have costing on tonight. It's something that certainly can be added if that's a direction that you want to go on an individualized basis or a school-wide basis. As you know, you have areas of some of your buildings, like the high school and the center core area, the C section, that has air conditioning already, but you have a lot of sections that don't. We are recommending in the two ferry schools, for example, in the office areas, to put air conditioning as part of the solution. So there are some targeted upgrades. But as far as classrooms or school-wide, that's there for advisement and further feedback from the board. So I'm going to just continue on. So consistent on page 4, this is kind of the same format that we had before. So we have a summary of upgrades starting at the high school. That's a condensed version. We'll give you the long version as a follow-up to this. And then we updated a graphic with your floor plan with 2 color coding schemes, and I'll go to that next. The orange is where you don't have ventilation now, and I'll qualify that. So in the case of the high school, in the E-wing there, you have ventilation in terms of ability to exhaust air out, as we talked about the last time. You do not have the capability to mechanically bring air in. And so anywhere we've categorized broadly that you don't have ventilation capabilities, we're just don't have full capabilities, and that's a lot of sections in your buildings. Anywhere in the purple is where you have existing equipment that needs to be upgraded and replaced that we're recommending. So if you were to look at the high school section, we're not recommending anything in the G 3-story section because that's in relatively new, in good shape. It can meet current code standards. We're not recommending anything in the kitchen CAF because you did that last year. And we're not recommending anything in the center core because even though that's an older system, it can meet current code. You've made some recent investments in that, like upgrading the air conditioning system there and some of the associated components. And we felt like you can get a lot more life out of that, and it's not an investment that needs to be addressed at this moment in time. And so that is not recommended. But anything else that's color-coded here would be included in the scope. So
actually, before you go off that slide,
yes.
where would the boys' locker room be in this? Would that be in the G section?
Yes.
You see where the gym is?
Yep, I do see boys' locker room in orange, so is that still not being recommended? Okay, it is being recommended. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, orange is no ventilation, and that is recommended. Purple is recommended as well, but it's replacing existing equipment. So like the F wing there, you have some really old, what we call unit ventilators. So they sit next to a window wall. Those are pieces of equipment that we're recommending replacement. Same in the gym. You have a big air handling system in the gym that we'd be recommending replacement as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So the scope page that going back to slide 4, this summarizes the basic areas of improvement that we're recommending. And I'll show you in a series of slides later. We're giving you tonight a proposal to do all of the scope in the high school. We'll give you a turnkey price to do that. And the additional data will be provided as far as the more detail around that. I'm happy to go through the scope if you like. I guess I'll look for direction here around, would you like us to get into some detail around each scope or provide more of a summary here this evening?
I'll just turn to the will of the board. Are we looking for some detail as we, I think we prefer detail.
Okay. All right. So you can see each section here, and I guess guide me on detail around it. So, we'll go through each particular area. And Wally, feel free to jump in where needed, particularly with the age. But you can see the first one is the F-wing 1965 unit ventilators. We talked about useful life the last time. Those are rated by a third-party entity, and I believe they're in the 25-year kind of range as far as useful life. I believe also those unit ventilators, Wally, correct me if I'm wrong, really weren't designed to meet current cubic feet of air per minute that should be ventilated throughout a classroom space. You should have about 15 cubic feet of air per minute. I don't believe those have the capacity to meet current standards as well. Plus, they're at the end of their useful life. So when you look at the color chart and you see that, that's what you have in the F-wing. We'd be looking to replace that in kind and also upgrade the controls as necessary on that. So it's tied into one integrated system. We're looking to replace 10 air handling units that are in this 1977 edition. They're spread out throughout the building in various areas. You know, they are recommended because they're in need of replacement and upgrades. So that's highlighted as well. We're looking to make modifications to the G-wing boiler system piping, and then the next bullet goes with it as well. We touched on this, I believe, in prior meetings. When you did the G-wing upgrade, you installed a separate boiler plant for that. That boiler plant has one boiler. So most schools are designed to have a backup boiler system. So what we're proposing to do is modify the piping and then also put a small condensing boiler in that would prevent you from freezing up that section of the building if you lost that boiler for an extended period of time. It's not a boiler that's big enough to potentially in the coldest day keep you going. It's enough to keep you from freezing. And we're doing that for two reasons: cost, as well as the space in that location as well of putting another boiler in.
So would that be the equivalent of a spare tire? You can only use it for so long.
That's a great analogy, Shannon. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Yeah, it's like really the size of like a suitcase. It goes on the wall. Yeah. No.
Okay.
Not on the wall. And
Yeah.
in the coldest of weather, probably boiler with very limited amount of out.
Okay. They need you to go onto the mic because the people at home can't hear. Sorry.
All right.
I'm getting waved by the back room. Thanks, Wally.
That boiler probably in the coldest of weather or real cold weather, you could still heat your building, but you would probably have to shut off the amount of outside air you would be bringing in for ventilation, for forced ventilation for a temporary amount of time. It's only the backup mainly to keep your building from freezing.
Right.
If
So kind of
something
an
happens.
insurance policy, like the mini spare that you get analogy. Yeah.
Excellent.
So in our evaluation, you have the two windows that we're looking to replace in the media center. This was something that Tom Tuso brought to our attention. There was some complaints there around comfort, and so we've taken some steps in this proposal to address those concerns specific to the windows and making sure you have enough heating in that area to mitigate those issues. And then there's a category in all of them. Again, the detail will be in follow-up we give you, but there's a miscellaneous upgrade. There's a bunch of smaller related things that would be too busy to outline on the slide. That includes some valves and controls upgrades. It includes areas in the buildings that have older ventilation shafts that are really just holes in the building now that we would cap and seal. It includes some miscellaneous mechanical other upgrades around adding to the pumping capacity, consolidating heating pumps, where you, instead of having a bunch of individual pumps, we would put 2 new heating pump size that give you full redundancy and backup. So there's a lot of individual categories like that that are categorized in that miscellaneous mechanical upgrades. Smaller items, but important items in the overall planning of a proper system. And if you have, again, questions or we're going too fast or not enough detail, just please ask away. So this is a page 6. 5 and 6 are just the different floors of the high school, but it's the same outline that we had previously that's just been upgraded to make sure it's accurate to the detailed assessment that we did. With that being said, I'm going to move to the Reed's Ferry School. So we're looking here, we have identified 38 classroom spaces and 2 offices that were not fully ventilated. And really that's if you look at the floor plan of that building, it's all the interior sections. It's the original 1968 section, and for both the Thornton's Ferry and Reed's Ferry, they're really carbon copies, as you know. And so in terms of upgrades, this location, we discussed this a little bit the last time, has a need for upgrading the office area, HVAC, so that means heating, ventilating, and air conditioning. There's also some window replacements that we've planned on here as part of this proposal. In the 1968 multi-purpose area, you have 2 old air handlers that we're looking to replace. They're at the end of their life and needing upgrades. And then within the ventilation area itself, I believe those are all univentilators that we're looking to install in the main center for both floors. And so one of the challenges and I wouldn't say challenge at times, but it's a cost challenge, is when you have no ventilation, it's always more expensive in an existing building, but when you have nothing there, to start from scratch. So, to install ventilation in this location here versus the F-wing at the high school. The F-wing at the high school, you have an existing unit vent, you have an air louver to the outside, you've got holes that are already in the building. All of those things need to be start from scratch and accommodated in the ferry schools, for example. So
That's not 100% true,
Yep.
Jim. In part of the
In
F-wing.
part, yes,
Not,
yep.
not all of the
Yep.
F-wing, okay.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
all right.
But in this particular location where you don't have anything from a constructability, from a design standpoint, those are just added cost challenges to get to where you want to go. So I'm going to move to Thornton's Ferry, a very, very similar outline, obviously a similar building design that we would look to do here. Same amount of spaces that are unventilated, addressing the office area HVAC and the window upgrades, and doing the miscellaneous upgrades.
Okay, and I think the one thing I wanted to add, just as a comment to those buildings, is when it comes to main offices, those are the offices and the facilities that are manned year-round by staff, where classrooms are seasonal. But I did have a question on classrooms. I do know that we have in all of our buildings split units that we identified for medically sensitive students. And so when it comes to summer programs where our students would be in place, would they be targeted to use those split units? So it's more of on our end. I'd have that question. If you don't have that answer right now, that's fine. But if we do have summer programs, are our students using those programs in the best optimal spaces for that?
The answer is yes, and it's based on John Fabrizio working with the respective person who's overseeing the summer school program, and then looking at the children's specific needs to make sure that they're addressed in proper fashion. So in other words, this year we had summer school going on at the middle school, so that was very helpful because we were having the roof done at Reed's Ferry, and at the upper elementary the same thing was true. If we needed to put someone in an air-conditioned system, then we looked where the split air was, and they got moved accordingly.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move from the ferry schools unless you'd like us to get into more details around the design and the areas of improvements.
I think we're good.
Okay. So Master Cole Upper Elementary School. So back in the Phase 2 project that we did in 2008, you did a bunch of upgrades to ventilation at that point in time, but there's still some areas that were not addressed. And so the idea here was to evaluate the remaining areas of that building. And so we've identified 14 additional classroom spaces in the old 2-story wing. And then you've also got ventilation needs in offices and then another smaller classroom. And so as highlighted here, that's installing a heating and ventilation system in the cafeteria, the gym location, replacing the 1965 circa systems in the special ed, library, guidance, locker room, and gym, upgrading the kitchen hood system there, and then providing some miscellaneous upgrades as well. And those are highlighted further on the floor plan layouts where those upgrades would occur. Any details you'd like to add there, Wooly?
No. Long as you understand that Jim, the first item, or second item, I guess, in that where he was talking about the gym is the APR room. That has no ventilation at all, as far as forced ventilation. The other gym is where the air handlers are that would be replacing the old air handlers that are, I know in the report, there's a lot of pictures and stuff like that in it of the condition of those units. And you think once you see the pictures, you'll understand why they probably ought to be replaced. that's, that's all I have
Yeah.
to add for now.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to the Mastrocola Elementary School, and so here we've identified 26 classrooms that would need to have ventilation upgrades and 4 offices. And you can see the backup here. I'm gonna let Wally go in and talk a little bit about the first 2 bullets and a little bit of background on those.
Well, replace the system that's in that APR room. There is an existing one. It's hanging in a closet. It's an older unit. It's in an area where it's very hard to service, so would be replacing that one. And the second bullet would be adding another condensing boiler in that boiler room down near the small gym. It's the last addition that was put onto that building. It only has 1 boiler, like the high school G-wing. So we'd be adding a small condensing boiler there to do the same thing we were for the G-wing at the high school. Mainly to provide freeze protection and heat. So. And then the other mechanical miscellaneous upgrades, skylights removed and exhaust fans replaced and stuff like that in the building.
Are there any questions on Mastrocola? Cinda.
Okay, so
Cinda had a question on Mastrocola.
okay, yes.
So,
You're not on.
thanks. As it relates to the administrative offices, is there air conditioning already in Mastrocola? I'm just trying to think if we're being consistent across all 3 elementary schools.
Yes, there is. There's a unit in up over the ceiling in that office area for the administration.
Okay,
So that is air conditioned.
okay,
yes.
great.
Thank you.
Yes. So the next page is just kind of a clarification or exclusions highlight. So we did preliminary engineering enough to come up with some very sound budget numbers to make decisions from. There is additional engineering that would need to occur in terms of things like a load calculation to make sure that when we add ventilation, when you give us feedback around what, if anything, you want to do, that we make sure we do to detail enough analysis to determine that you have enough boiler capacity to handle the extra ventilation that's existing installed. And things like the size and diameter of the heating pipes are big enough to handle additional velocity that we would need to go through them to accommodate things. So those 2 areas at this point are excluded from any of the estimated numbers that we have. We've evaluated your existing boiler capacity. You have enough reserve now to handle the additional, but we're going to eat up most of your reserve, where in the event that you have a failure of 1 boiler, that lack of reserve would create some vulnerabilities if 1 boiler failed. So that's to be highlighted, but again, there's enough capacity to handle the extra ventilation. We haven't done enough analysis on the heating pipe size. I think we feel like it's okay, but it's just additional due diligence that would need to occur, and we want to be upfront that those 2 areas are not included in the budget estimates that we have at this point. So if you go to the next page, wanted to provide really a summary of the budgets that we've come up with and for presentation tonight. So again, we looked at we've summed it up into 2 categories: the lighting upgrades within the 6 schools, and you can see the budgetary cost and the savings, both in terms of annual energy savings and in terms of an operational savings number. The latter one's really an estimate. LED lights, as I think probably most people know, have a much longer life cycle than a fluorescent technology. Some as much as more than 20 years that they'll last, and even ratings from the manufacturer. So we've estimated there'll be some savings in Tom Tusso's budget, to the tune of an estimated number of $7,500 for less electrical labor to replace and less parts to buy in terms of existing equipment. And you can see the payback that's associated with that project. Budgetary cost of $860,000 and a simple payback of just under 11 years. And then when we look at each one of the HVAC controls, so this is all improvements that we looked at, that we just summarized for each location, some significant upgrades in your buildings to make sure that you have fully code-compliant ventilation or ventilation in all areas and a comprehensive system around it. And we broke out the estimated budgetary costs for each school. And then to the right of that, what we've done is when we spoke to you before and we had the sample cash flows, we had estimated at the time maybe as much as $150,000 of additional energy savings that could occur district-wide with some potential improvements. We found just under about 90,000 from what we looked at, but the counter effect that's shown there in red is that when we would upgrade your buildings for ventilation that's not in there now, you have electrical energy to move fan motors around, to move fans around, and then you have thermal energy to heat up outside air that's not coming into your building. So it's really an offsetting effect. That when I think I sum up at the bottom, you have about 88,819 in energy savings annually that we estimated. If you did all of the ventilation upgrades, it'll cost you about $10,000 of additional energy just with that offset effect. So if you were to add up the reds there and subtract the dark numbers in the energy savings, it's a slightly negative number. And I'll show you that on some subsequent cash flows that I have included. So you'll see that the total estimated cost of these improvements is about $11.5 million. So significant investment that's required. There's many different paths to get there based upon your discretion, whether that's individual buildings or doing combination of buildings at one time or an entire project. And I've got 4 scenarios to kind of walk you through illustrations of things to think about. Happy to address questions on this page before I move on to the next.
Are there questions?
All right.
Continue.
Yeah, okay, so I'd like to go over, so we had, this is similar if you kind of compare the last proposal. I had laid out 3 scenarios at the time when we didn't know pricing of how much you could self-fund. And we looked at additional energy savings, a utility rebate, and then basically refinancing existing debt. Refinancing and reinvesting it, the same budget amounts. So scenario 1, at the time then, was about $2.5 million. Now we're estimating it to be about $1.7 million. And the reason for that is primarily that we had that negative ventilation, the cost to ventilate effect that wasn't calculated then, and that really is the result of it being a lower amount. This is the option to give your consideration around how much you could self-fund by existing money in your budget and to be debt-free at the goal at the end of fiscal year 24. So it's a 5-year financing term. It's a lower interest rate that we're using in this estimate of around 2.5% versus longer financing periods of 3.5%. And it would all be funded by the sources that are identified there in the second bullet. The next scenario is scenario 2. Scenario 2 is consistent with how we looked at it before, where it does everything in scenario 1, but it takes the financing out to a 15-year term. So it takes, you have debt in your budget of about $450,000 for our phase 1 and 2 project. That would be completely paid off at the end of FY21. And so the consideration here is if you refinance that from a higher interest rate to a lower interest rate, and then extended the term out for a new 15-year term, that would allow you to self-fund in your budget based upon those assumptions, the $5.75 million. So money that wouldn't have an upfront expense, but it's all part of what is in your existing budget. Scenario 3 takes that one step further, and instead of you using those same in-budget monies and going to 15 years, it would take it to 20 years. And if you go to an extra 5 years of financing, it allows you another $2 million worth of potential buying power in that self-funded formula. And then the last scenario, scenario 4 for consideration, basically just says if you looked at doing everything, similar to scenario 3, where it's a 20-year financing term, and use the same funding sources, that it gives you that option. And you'll see in the cash flow that I'll show you in a minute that you would need to come up with, in that particular example, about another $250,000 a year through your CIP or another funding source to fund all of those improvements based upon that particular financing scenario. So 4 things just to kind of illustrate the possibilities here around in-budget funding and how you start to chip away at some of this. The next 4 pages, I'm happy to go through with you, really just provide a little more detail into the summary that I gave you on the prior slide. So I'll illustrate the first one just to orient you again with the format of this. So the top portion of this talks a little bit about some of the variables in each one. This first one is scenario 1. This shows you the 1.7 million that we had shown as a self-funded amount in the beginning. It then highlights that you would have to refinance, if you're going to do that, about $456,000 of principal that still remains on the phase 1 and 2 debt. That would all be done at a new interest rate of 2.5%. Your current rate is about 4.5% on that phase 1 and 2 debt. And then we would do this over a 5-year term. So you'd begin payments in FY20, starting next July, and then you would finish to be debt-free at the end of FY24. And the top part of this shows the fiscal year, and it shows project revenue sources. And so you can see the energy cost avoidance. That would be the guaranteed energy reduction of $88,819. The operational estimated cost avoidance of $7,500. CIP allocation is blank in all of these, or zeroed out. And then we have the budgeted Honeywell Energy retrofits. That's the line item you have in your current budget for the phase 1 and 2 debt service lease purchase. Current year, I believe, is $451,674. And then that debt in its duration has escalated. I think each payment increases at 3% per year. So we've carried out that same assumption in each one of these cash flows. And then you can see how we go down to project costs. So the idea is we have existing dollars, we have $547,993 as far as possible funding sources. And then the offsetting cost is a lease purchase payment of $435,354. The cost to ventilate, so this is the new energy required to ventilate all buildings. And then you can see at the bottom, it's kind of an annualized cash flow of about $13,000 to the positive. Now, an assumption in each one of these cash flows, and I left it this way because it's kind of a wash effect, so whatever we can save is almost offset with new ventilation. So the assumption here is that you do whatever ventilation improvements that you do. If you did like a whole building and you did a lighting in a whole building, they're going to pretty much offset themselves. That's not exactly true when we look at a very customized project, but I was just trying to illustrate really the amount you potentially could self-fund. There's not a specific project I've aligned to this. So I remember Andy, who's not here, had asked that during a capital improvement committee about what's the scope for this project. There is no scope. We're just trying to show you. We gave you the numbers on the prior page. Here's the amount of self-funded buying power you can have in scenarios 1, 2, 3, and 4. The scope, there would be a scope in scenario 4 that would be saying you're doing everything and it shows you the cash flow. But I just wanted to highlight that so to give you an idea of what this is trying to illustrate. Each of the other scenarios are really laid out in the exact same way. Again, the difference is if we go to page 20, scenario 2, now we're basically using a new 15-year borrowing term versus a new 5-year borrowing term. Interest rate, because it's a longer term, goes from an assumed 2.5% rate to 3.5%. And the main difference is that because you're having a new 15-year term, you're also reinvesting that phase 1 and 2 payment that's refinanced in this example to that new 15-year term. So you're keeping that within budget at a longer period of time. But that's allowing you to free up more capital dollars to deal with some of the issues that we're highlighting in your buildings. Any questions?
I think so far so good.
Okay.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Really a clarification.
Yes.
Like, for example, in the Ferry schools, I mean, the ventilation systems are the original ventilation systems, correct? They're
That's correct.
50 years old because those schools just turned 50. So we're talking about a really long time that we've had the systems in place.
In the oldest sections of the school, yes. You've got the two ends of the school that have newer ventilation. but there's very little ventilation actually in the oldest section of the school. It's mainly just in the APR room.
Gotcha.
The majority of your square footage in those buildings that's occupied is
No ventilation.
no ventilation. Yeah.
Right. And so those are the ones that you have, the ones from 1968,
Yes.
whereas you didn't recommend to replace the newer ones.
That's correct,
Clearly.
yep. And I think the newer ones are around 2005, if I remember right, when you did the last edition, right?
But I just wanted to highlight that those are really old systems. I mean,
Absolutely. And I guess the question I have, because I know you're looking at 20-year options, is what's the life cycle of the equipment that you're proposing?
I mean, I think it really shouldn't be any different, if we assume the following, it shouldn't be any different than the ones you have now.
50 years, maybe?
Assuming,
Really?
well, I think you've arguably gone past, I think you've been I don't want to say the word enabled, you put yourself in a position to go past because you've invested in preventive maintenance. You've been very proactive over the years in doing that, and I think it shows why you invest annually in preventive maintenance, because you've extended the useful life. How much further you can extend it, those are question marks when it comes to replacing existing equipment. You're really at that point with some of your systems now. Now, that's different than where you're talking about in the ferry schools or sections of the high school or other building, all your buildings where you have no ventilation. So there's, some areas have ventilation, some areas don't.
Right.
And some of the systems that have ventilation don't have enough capabilities within that ventilation to meet current code standards around if you built a brand-new building, like the middle school, the standards that the middle school was built under.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You could choose in any of your buildings to do just the non-ventilated ones and leave your old systems as they are, but they are gonna fail on you after a while. They've come close to that now, but like at the ferry schools, as we said, you got very little ventilation there, other than in the two end wings that were put on last. The only other forced ventilation you really have in that building is in the gym, the old gym or the cafeteria. So,
Excellent.
Okay, I'll just quickly go through the last two pages and then we'll wrap it up with any additional questions. So the scenario 3, I think I'm on page 20, but I just, right here, page 21, excuse me. So this is, again, the only difference from the last one we reviewed. This is going from 15 to 20 years of borrowing, taking out the same funding sources just for a longer period of time, and that allows you about another $2 million in potential buying power around addressing some of these improvements. And then the last scenario basically says if you did everything, just to kind of illustrate what this would look like. This is the same assumption as scenario 3, so it's 20-year term of borrowing using the same funding sources. But in this one, we're negative on the bottom about $256,000. And so this would require some additional money to come up with. So that's the main difference in this illustration, but it would allow you to address everything in one comprehensive, concentrated effort. So happy to stop there and address any questions that you might have, and we appreciate your time this evening.
Naomi?
So this is kind of a sideways question, but I just came from having a workshop in a building in an entirely different campus where the ventilation was extraordinarily noisy, and it made me wonder the different things you're proposing. What would the noise levels be in the building related to them?
And I'm sorry, the beginning of that, were you referring to a building in the district?
Just in general, the various
Okay.
pieces that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll start and I'll let my colleagues add in. I mean, we have to, part of a code has a certain noise level that it's got to stay within. So when you design something to meet current standards and a professional engineer stamps it, it's got to be within a certain decimal range. That being said, if there are certain types of equipment might have a different noise philosophy. So if it's a air handling, if you look above here, each one of these diffusers has got either a rooftop unit or an air handler above that's through ductwork distributing air. And so that can have a different noise based upon how it's designed versus a unit ventilator. Your expectation, though, would be that what we're designing for systems would be certainly within code and would not be areas where you have noise. A lot of times noise happens in maybe some of your old gym units that are just, they bang when they start up. They're just different reasons that you get to that point. It might be a maintenance issue on them. Could be the velocity, like the pipe sizing example with the potential upgradings. The ductwork isn't big enough or was never sized right enough. There could be a variety of issues, but any upgrades that we would do for you, your expectation should be that they should be within code noise levels. And if there are noise issues, I can certainly point to Gary in the back. We've had lots of these kind of feedback issues when you install ventilation, particularly in an area that doesn't have any. People are gonna have different effects. Maybe some noise, which never should be so loud that it's a disruption, and there's ways that you can mitigate that through lining of a duct or putting a variable speed drive in to vary the speed of things. But you also, when you have air moving in a space that's never had it, you're gonna feel, it's gonna feel fresher, but you'll hear noise, you'll feel air blowing on you, just different characteristics that are there that, you know, if you don't have it before and you get it later, it's gonna feel a little different. So it's a long answer to your question, but you certainly should not expect with these upgrades any noise issues that are gonna drive complaints that can't be dealt with.
Is, in the second floor of upper elementary.
Yeah, come on up, Gary.
So in the second floor of the upper elementary school, you have unit vents that we installed 4 years ago?
It would be 2008,
Yeah.
9, yeah.
So those units, thank you, Ed. Those units would give you a really good idea of what you would be seeing in all the spaces, like the 2 ferry schools are gonna be 90% unit vents. All of the high school, for the most part, or most of it's gonna be unit vents. And the lower Massacola would be unit vents. So if you wanted to get acclimated to what you're gonna see and hear, take a walk over there and go up to the, I think it's the first and second floor backside facing the fields is where we install those units, and it'd be similar. But to Jim's point, one thing you should be highly aware of is that you have classrooms that have no ventilation. And, you know, human nature is, it's quiet there now. Anything you put in there is gonna be, oh my God, this is noisy. So it all has to be considered, you know, moving forward, that we're adding ventilation. Yes, there'll be new noise, but as Jim said, it would be installed within, you know, code requirements. But again, take a look at those units, maybe talk to those teachers.
No, the level of detail in your answer is very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay. Cinda, sorry. You did.
Thank you so much for all of this information. It's very detailed all the way around, and I can't even imagine how much work it took to pull this together. I do have a couple questions, because I know we're going into our budget season coming up, and one thing that would be really helpful for me is to get a perspective on, out of the overall proposal, you know, which items are most critical, or which items, let's say we didn't move, what that cost or the potential risk would be. You know, some information around that to help me better frame, I think, what the overall proposal is and how we move forward. I will say that I'm very much in favor of getting ventilation into our classrooms. I mean, not having ventilation with so many individuals in a classroom, and the fact that it wouldn't pass code today concerns me. So I'm eager to make some improvements that I think will benefit the entire school community. But anything that would kind of help me frame this, because certainly you went through and, you know, there were some things you're like, wow, you're lucky this is still going, and if it breaks, then you've got big problems because of X, Y, and Z. And I don't have that background knowledge, and so any information that you could provide through Matt or Tom Tussaud even would be really helpful for me.
We will do that. One of the, and maybe this is for discussion amongst yourselves or a follow-up meeting with us. One of them is amongst that question, do you focus on areas that have no ventilation? And like Wally said, and leave what you have? Or so some of the priority things that we may drive to is where you have existing equipment that maybe is on its last legs. But if you have nothing in a space that has higher CO2 or the ability to, as some of our readings did, do you put a higher priority on that? So there's some individual kind of thinking that is going to skew it one way or the other, but we'll certainly put some thought to that and give you some follow-up.
Well, and the data too. So the CO2 readings, I think, are very pertinent to this conversation. So, anything that supports,
You
im-
have all of the CO2 report.
Correct. Yep. But we will provide some thought to that at your request and follow up with Matt and Marge and Tom.
Perfect. And then another item that came up when we discussed this back in July was regarding the air conditioning temperatures, which I appreciate you took that feedback, and in a couple cases, you made some recommendations as part of this. And I know, Matt, you were going to take some temperatures in some of the classrooms, and I'm not saying that I need those now, but as we kind of go into these overall discussions, some areas of concern in particular. Oh, do you? Of course you do.
Of course I would. Yeah, you would ask that question at the beginning of the school year,
Yeah,
and I can make this available to everyone, but I do have it here, where we took a temp on 8/31 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we took a temperature at 9/4/18, that was when school started, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the outside temperature on both dates, I can't find it right here, but the differentiation in room to room was probably an additional 4 to 5 degrees increase with kids in. So you're going from without kids, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at around 79, 78, 75, and then with kids, you're going to around 82, 83, one room 88, 85. So there is probably a jump in the temperatures of those rooms early in the school year when they're occupied of maybe on average 5 degrees.
and then particularly if you get a 90-degree day or something like that, which is not uncommon, at the beginning of the school year or the end of the
Right.
school year. And then you throw in, let's say, no ventilation, then you start to get, I think, a very uncomfortable situation. So I know that the concerns that I had initially were around upstairs at J Muse and upstairs at the high school. The older brick buildings, which
Mm-hmm.
I think we said, hot bricks, what you cook pizzas in, it's like, there's just some concern that I have there. So I would say let's keep an eye on that too, but
Yeah.
I mean, it was part of my budget message as well, so we may want, at least I may want some additional information that could be considered as we go into some of these overall discussions. Okay.
Yeah, and, Jim, Wally, and Gary bring up, valid points. When you're looking at ventilation, especially in the ferry schools or whatever, do you go after those rooms that have nothing? Do you go after the rooms that have units that potentially will fail in the next couple of years? So it's a lot of questions and discussion you have to ask yourself to come up with a solution that's going to try and at least take care of the issue. I know the rooms with ventilation, I've heard the units, they're really quiet. I can tell you that for a fact. You don't even realize that they're on, but you can feel the air come through. And that's one thing that a lot of the other rooms don't, and you can definitely feel a difference between walking into one of those rooms with nothing and then walking into one of the rooms where we did, especially, J Muse, the ones, like you said, on the ball field side, they have air circulation coming up, so it's a difference, but it's something to talk about. A lot of things to discuss.
Naomi?
I don't know who would come with this, but to dovetail on what you were saying, it would be useful to know whether if we cherry pick our projects, if that adds to the cost in some way for the whole, or not, or if it saves money. But my point is, if one begins to pick, it can affect the overall price of doing it all over time, and I'd be curious to know about that as well.
Yeah, I think there's economy of scales in a couple ways. If you did scenario 4 versus scenario 1, there's economy of scales of like you know, what Gary does, where he's a project manager, there's going to be, those are some soft costs that you'll have some economic benefit. If you do projects over time, there's the time value of money, obviously, that comes in. There are some soft costs in terms of design and project management and other things that you've got to remobilize every time, that you've got to carry over. So there's no question that it's cheaper to do as much as you can now, but that comes into, you know, affordability, you know. And so, yeah, I think depending upon your scenario, there is an economy of scale benefit. It's really going to be based upon your feedback, but those would be some areas that would be impactful with added costs as you try to address the issue in total.
Any other questions or comments? Well, I would say that this board in the last couple of years has faced things that have not been faced in decades, and this has not been faced in half a century based on what we're talking about. So although these are big numbers, they're numbers that were avoided for generations of school boards. So I consider it a little brave of us to take this on, because we know that in the advent of social media, can be, with the little bit of information, can take on a life of its own. So when it comes to data and delivering this information, it's going to be very important for us, regardless of what direction we take, to contextualize what was presented to us tonight and the consequences of action and inaction for those presentations. So to that, we're going to have our work cut out from us. We definitely want to make sure we're staying on top of that, engaging the community and letting them know, you know, the pros and cons of what's being presented to us, and what's optional and what's not, which we're learning is some of it is becoming very not optional because it's 50 years old. And they're not small ticket items. Just like our roofs, this is, you know, something that we haven't addressed, like we haven't had to address our roofs, but now we're addressing another large ticket item. And that will definitely be something that's going to require a strong, focused, and responsible communication plan so that it can be delivered fairly and accurately. So my 2 cents on it. But it's good information for us. It's smart for us to have this information. Data-driven decisions are the best-driven decisions. So this gives us a lot to work with. We really do appreciate the time and the effort you took to put together such a comprehensive option plan for us. And we thank you so much.
You're very welcome. We'll follow up on the request that you had and provide you some additional details as discussed.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And we will transition to item number 4, which is a preview of upcoming grades 5 to 12 World Language Curriculum Initiatives. And so I invite to the table Mark McLaughlin, Angela Mazlanka, the Department Chair for High School Foreign Language, Danielle Dunn, ooh, and the lights are on, and Stephanie Sakala. So welcome all, and sorry if I mangled any names too badly.
So while my colleagues are getting situated, I would just offer just a thanks to Principal Sharon Putney, who's in the audience, who's here to provide her support for the World Language Initiative that is underway. So I'm just going to start just by having the board, as you hear this presentation, to draw your attention to common themes that we've begun to, over the last couple of years, share with you, because this latest curriculum initiative is very much in the same spirit of a lot of the other things that we've been about, with whether it be math that you've most recently heard about, or science, or art, or some of our other initiatives. So there's a common thread running through, and I just invite you to be hearing those threads as you listen to this presentation. So I'll let Angela introduce her colleagues again.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. Anyway, good evening again, and thank you, Dr. McLaughlin. I am so excited and terrified to be here tonight with my colleagues. So I'm very grateful that Stephanie and Danny and I were all able to come together. We actually represent a larger team of teachers in the district, and one of the ideas that has come up many times for our group and is expressed in different ways is building a bridge and connecting and cohesion. We're really excited by the idea of coming together to, as a 5 through 12 group and working on this project. I'm trying to calm down, pardon me. First, I'd like to give you context for the World Language Curriculum revision. The current World Language Curriculum was adopted in 2003. Since that date, there have been several revisions to the national standards released by the American Council for Teaching Foreign Languages. The College Board has changed the way they assess student proficiency in modern languages through updates to the AP Language and Culture exams in French, Spanish, and Chinese. In the past 15 years, we've also seen changes in the way communities understand skills development through initiatives such as the College and Career Ready Standards and New Hampshire State Competencies. Our understanding of curriculum design has evolved through Universal Design for Learning, Understanding by Design, and Framework for 21st Century Learning Guidelines. In addition, the Merrimack School District has adopted an educator evaluation model, which expects these guidelines to be the foundation in the planning and delivery of instruction for student learning. A world language curriculum revision would grant all of us the opportunity to incorporate these developments in a new document to guide teaching and learning in world languages as we look to the future. So in creating a shared vision, we want to think about how world languages can enhance our vision of the Merrimack graduate. Learners are enhanced by studying world languages, and the knowledge and skills they develop help them beyond travel to other countries or person-to-person interactions in a different language. Students learn to negotiate misunderstandings in a variety of everyday settings and meaningfully connect with people in business and social settings. Typically, this is going back to that other theme, when we think about interdisciplinary courses, we're thinking about linking or connecting two very different classes. And in world language, we're not pairing with another teacher. Spanish, French, Latin, Chinese, and Arabic classes reinforce these larger cross-curricular themes within the class. When we talk to tu and usted or vous in French, we're speaking to students about how to appropriately address people in different situations, and also that there's different ways to communicate based on intent. There's also discussions in our classes about the mechanics of language, such as tenses and moods, prefixes and suffixes, and word order that invite students to analyze their own language. And learning about artists, musicians, writers, and history resonate in other classes as well. When talking about larger themes, when I talk to my students in my Spanish 1 class about how school days are different from country to country, and then I talk to my AP Spanish 5s about work days, they're writing persuasive essays from 3 sources, and it's usually an article and a news source and then a graph of some kind, and then they write a persuasive essay. We're still in both levels talking about this bigger theme and this overarching essential question: how are contemporary life and communities the people live in influenced by culture? A world language curriculum is our way to focus on our shared vision and goals for Merrimack graduates. As students are grouped and regrouped in different classes each year and with different teachers, the individual teachers will not be advantaging or disadvantaging any one student as they move through the system. It's our collective work and responsibility to share tasks and come to agreements for the benefit of our students. And on that note, I'm just one voice on the team, and I'd like to pass the baton to Stephanie.
All right. So, good evening. My name's Stephanie Sakala. I'm one of the Spanish teachers at the middle school. And before I start, I just wanted to take a moment to personally thank you for the decision you made over the summer to make my position at the middle school full-time. I think it sends a strong message of support and commitment on your behalf to the World Language Department, and it will help motivate us to produce results for this curriculum review when we know that they'll be appreciated and valued by the district. So again, I want to thank you for that. As for the middle school perspective, on the curriculum review, we hope to solidify the communication between buildings in an effort to build continuity of language learning throughout a student's career here in the Merrimack School District. Recently, or actually this year, we adopted a new daily schedule at the middle school, and it provides 7th and 8th graders with world language 5 days a week for the whole school year. Personally, I have taught middle school in Spanish, or middle school Spanish in Michigan, Connecticut, and most recently in North Carolina. And I've observed that the more time students are given to learn a second language, the higher level of proficiency they can achieve by the time they graduate. So I think this curriculum review will be the perfect opportunity for us as a team to discuss how to utilize this time that we have with students, starting in 5th grade and moving all the way through 12th grade to prepare them for their future. Honestly, when we got together in June for the very first meeting, I was a little overwhelmed because this is an enormous task that lay before us. But I spent that day with this team listening to my colleagues, and they really had some insightful remarks about why we are all here teaching a second language. And it really started to kind of get me fired up and excited about being a part of this review team, because we all have this same goal and this same idea that by the end of this process, we really want to improve the educational lives of the students in this district through language learning. Finally, as a parent of 2 children in the school district, I'm thrilled that my daughter and son will be exposed to French and Spanish when they move to the upper elementary. So with that being said, I'll introduce one of their future teachers as soon as next year at the upper elementary, Danny Dunn.
Hi, I'm Danny Dunn. I'm the French teacher at the upper elementary school. And I just want to give you some perspective from our school, the upper elementary 5th and 6th grade level, as far as this review of curriculum goes. So much has changed just in our building, just in our grade level since 2003. Namely the restructuring of all of the grade levels in different buildings and the creation of the upper elementary, so that was new. That offered us to allow the French and Spanish at the 5th grade level, whereas previously it was just 6th grade. And the model that we use for daily schedule and how often we meet has changed as well. Previously, they probably met in 6th grade around 36 times, but total now, because we teach French language and Spanish language during their special time, we additionally teach French and Spanish cultural enrichment. So that adds up to around 54, so that's a lot more than previously. So revising the world language curriculum will allow us to adapt to these changes and more, and that will help our students to achieve their highest potential. Coming together as a team of world language teachers from all the schools ensures that we can make the students' journey through our program cohesive and meaningful from JMUS all the way through MHS. So my students are often asking me sort of what happens next, what do we look forward to, what will my world language look like, years from now? And we tell them that it starts here in the upper elementary at 5th and 6th grade level. 1 semester of French, 1 semester of Spanish in both your 5th and 6th grade years. But my story kind of ends when I tell them that in 6th grade they'd sort of choose a path, and then from there they stick with one language or the other. But that tells me that we need kind of a roadmap for students to show them where they're going, to give them a destination, and that will help them, that'll help guide them through their transitions between schools and languages for the duration that we have them. So thank you.
Pardon me. I had one other thing I was going to hand out, but sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Never done this
Thank you.
before.
That's all right, Angela. You're doing great.
Okay, so thank you so much for your time tonight and allowing me to wing it, like handing out papers. We are so excited to work together. This one last thing I wanted to share with you is a contemporary overview from ACTFL, which again is the American Council for the Teaching of Foreign Languages. And is an overview of what students in a world language program should know and be able to do with a language at each level. So if you look on the left-hand column, the ACTFL levels start at the bottom with novice low and go up through distinguished. The next column, which says ILR, is the Interagency Language Roundtable Scale, and what that is our federal government scale for ranking proficiency in a world language. So if you get a government job at the federal level, that's what they would use for that. Language functions, if you look in that larger column, tells what you would be able to do with language. So at the novice level, you can use memorized phrases and recombine them. In the intermediate level, you're asking and responding to simple questions, but really you need things to be predictable. And then in the advanced level, you move into unanticipated situations and you're able to use your language. In that large center column, they give some examples of professions that might correspond with those with people performing at those levels. And then the far right-hand column is students who would typically perform at those levels. And if you notice the kind of greenish one towards the bottom, the intermediate, that says language learners following a 6 to 8 year sequence of study. So what I guess I would like to call your attention to is that this document helps us recalibrate our expectations of a student's performance at each level and also our understanding of a student's journey in using language. So a lot of times we say, well, I want to be fluent. And proficiency is really a range of things that you can do with language. So how do we look at what can we have our students learning to be able to do with their language and how can we move them to those next levels? And then we'd love to answer any questions, but I'd like to ask you one from us real quick and take notes, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay.
I have to answer in Spanish. It's been since '89. Good luck.
Oh, goodness. Well, now I want to ask in Spanish. Really, I just wanted to know, you guys all represent diverse constituents in town and also come from different fields yourselves. So we were wondering, if you think about world languages and our vision of the Merrimack graduate, how can world languages enhance your vision of a Merrimack graduate? Because if you have any thoughts, I want to write them down.
Okay. We're going to have you repeat it one more time. I'm going to each take a crack at it.
Okay, so we're curious in your thoughts about Merrimack graduates and where you've seen languages in your professions or in what your constituents talk about seeing as what they want their kids to be able to do or their people they hire be able to do with language. How can our Merrimack graduates use a world language? Is that more clear?
Yep. We'll start with Naomi. Do you want to take it first, Naomi?
Well, I don't think that my answer is too original, but I think it still gets to the point. For me, there are two parts to it. There's the aspect of simply being able to use that language in whatever capacity they will, but I think there's very little question that any exposure to a second language, the more the better, enhances the way that one thinks. In general, one's ability to use one's native language, the complexity of thoughts that you construct, and I would consider those to be equally, if not more important, in the long term.
Cinda?
I mean, I think there's a variety of benefits to a world language, of learning a world language, particularly in today's global society. I work in IT. There's people that speak different languages. Often there's conference calls around the world. So not only just learning a language that might help one communicate with a potential coworker or through a future business arrangement or could be military. I mean, there's a variety of places, or just even the expansion of, let's say, the growth of the Latino population in the United States and how that continues to grow and is expected to grow to pretty significant percentages over the next 20 to 30 years. So there's those reasons. And the other reason, a little bit more along with what Naomi was saying, is I think that what a language does, learning a language, I think is good for a person's overall development. You're learning about mapping. You're learning about how this equals this. You're learning a whole thought process that I think is good for your overall IQ.
lastly, there is an element of cultural understanding that comes with learning a language. So in an area like Merrimack where there's not a lot of diversity, or New Hampshire in general, and even New England, I would say, I think learning a language helps provide some diversity education as well as another benefit.
Brandy?
First, I just want to say a huge thank you for your presentation and all that you guys are putting into this. I think world language is beyond valuable, especially for our youth. I personally feel that when you're going through your education, it makes you a very well-rounded student when you can graduate having a solid understanding of a language, being able to proficiently communicate with varying degrees of individuals from any background that they may have. But I also, sort of piggybacking on what Cinda was saying, I really think that the cultural element is huge. The amount that you learn once it's not just speaking the language, it's really understanding the culture behind the language. I had to take Latin for a lot of years, and I struggled. I really did. But I know more about the English language because I had so much Latin experience. And then it also, when you learn one language, you're also then able to sort of move and understand other languages easier. The other element that I really enjoy about world language is that you learn how incredibly difficult our language is to learn, which I found very interesting as I've taken Latin, French, Spanish, and I've tap danced in German. And it's the amount of things that come into what we as English-speaking individuals, it's crazy how hard our language is to learn. So you have a new appreciation for those that are coming into our country having zero background at all in learning English. And if we could, partner in some way to help others that are, English as a second language, I think there's a lot of partnerships that could happen within our own system of learning language. So I think it's fabulous, and I really do think that you create a very well-rounded graduate when they're going off into the world having a solid understanding of world language.
And I'll give you my layered answer. I'll give you my answer because I'm a parent of 2 high school students, and my son is a Mandarin student, and he's talking about what he can do with his career as it relates to how he can leverage his Mandarin in that, knowing that that's a leg up for some specific careers, and realizing he's going to have a leg up in the market to really be successful as long as he studies his Mandarin. So we'll work on that at home. To my daughter's end, she is actually going to Costa Rica this year with the Spanish program. So to that, I think that when you talk about the district's opportunity to immerse students in foreign cultures through the language program, as this program will do, I think that also is an opportunity that was only afforded to those who took foreign language seriously and wanted, and progressed in the program. You could not sign up if you weren't in Spanish 2 or higher. So to that, I think you are opening those doors. As an adult who did not get the gift that my father's side of the family had, my sister is a language major. She did her master's in French, had a minor in Spanish, dabbled in Japanese, Russian, German, Italian, and some of the Nordic languages because she, just checked out up there. So she definitely understands, the global impact of language. So to the highest level of experience and to the lowest level of experience, my father, who was 2 steps from warden in a prison. And so his professional experience in foreign language was very valuable because of the foreign languages that were spoken by inmates that ranged from, a number of foreign languages, not, Spanish, French. There was, Albanian, there was Italian, so when they were speaking their native language, he was picking up on what they were talking about as the big German guy sitting in the middle of it. So it actually helped his career even in what you call the least advantageous of environments. So foreign language, regardless of the environment, I think has value. I think if we present those skills to be able to offer that value, that's our job as a district, and we need to make sure our students have a leg up. When it comes to Latin, I definitely know that those that want to go into the medical practice, the legal practice, literature, you're a ringer on the SAT if you took some Latin. So that's definitely worthy of a worthy cause if you needed a foreign language there. I think if we didn't offer a number of years to a foreign language, you're actually at a disadvantage as you're applying to colleges. So those who do want to go into that environment, you definitely want to make sure that they're putting the best foot forward. But those going straight to the workforce, having that exposure to foreign language, I think makes you a more capable employee at a younger age because you are willing to engage in a multicultural environment. So I don't think there's a downside. Things that as a board we talked about years past is knowing that the Mandarin program has a lot of potential upside, but hasn't quite gone to the highest levels yet. 7th and 8th grade exposure to this board, I think, is very would be of great interest, whether it be a club or an after-school program or something that would get them exposure, so that when they go to look at it for 9th grade, it doesn't become a threat to their GPA, that there's a little more comfort to it. If it can be offered as a class, I think that'd be great, but I'm a realist. So we know what part-time foreign language can do to a program. It's challenging, and we thank you for sticking with us until we could make your role full-time. But we know that makes it a not easy process for you. So I think there's a lot to be said for this language program based on the exposure that we had, both as a board and as parents. So, but definitely seeing, diving down. And then also I think there's always a question for 5th and 6th grade. Does it make sense to track early? Because, you have a desire, you maybe have a family who speaks a lot of French, so it's a no-brainer. You may have a desire to learn Spanish, and that's not going to waver. So getting a more in-depth education up front and a consistent education might have value too, and I'd be interested to know what your long-term thoughts are on that. Not expecting to change on a dime, but when it comes to it, I remember when I was in college and it wasn't my major, I was supposed to take 2 different programming languages, and once I learned one, I couldn't adapt well to the other, even though the other one was organically easier to understand, because that first one was definitely where I got my foundations. So, and it wasn't what I was going to major in, so it was a have to do. So for that, if foreign language has that same challenge, and it might, I've never had the experience, then I'd like to see them be able to, really, dig deeper as quickly as they can. But that's my personal opinion, not a directive, obviously. So that's my 2 cents on foreign language. Chris, do you have anything?
Spanish is fun.
Okay. So, muy bien. Thank you. So that's the question you have for us. Are there any questions for them? Cinda.
I have 2 questions. One is regarding the document that you had handed out, more of a curiosity question as it relates to proficiency levels. Would you state, how would you state those align with like a literacy level? At a certain, sometimes you'll hear newspapers are written for, let's say, a 7th grade literacy level or something like that. Would you say that there's a correlation then to literacy level to these degrees of proficiency?
To be honest, pardon me, I'm not sure. Do I have to push it again?
No,
okay.
The green one's on.
Sorry. Apparently I'm not familiar with this. I've read crosswalks between the proficiency levels and performance on the AP exam. So someone who's typically at the advanced low most often will correlate with getting a 5 on the AP exam. I have read language studies about English and how many words you typically need to know. I think it's 5,000 to 6,000 words in English to be able to interact in daily life, but I haven't been able to find clear information on Spanish, which is what I teach, but I will certainly investigate that in the course of our work. I'll make a note.
Great. And then the second question I have is, and I'm don't recall hearing it, is what maybe the go-forward approach might be for fifth grade, where there's the semester of Spanish, the semester of French, and helping me understand the benefits for the students and taking the semester in each, if there's any unintended consequences, or what maybe that go-forward approach might be leaning towards. Any insights around that would be appreciated.
So we definitely feel so lucky to be able to offer it at the 5th and 6th grade level, but we also have a lot of, I think our biggest challenge is probably that it is a little fragmented where they have the one semester of each. But in some ways it really works out well because you don't want, if we say had 1 year of French in 5th grade and then 1 year of Spanish in 6th grade, you wouldn't want a student to feel like it's been a year since I learned French, maybe I shouldn't take it next year, or vice versa. But going forward, best case scenario would be, in my opinion, to meet more often. The more we can see the students, the better, as Stephanie was saying earlier. But with every schedule, there's challenges. I mean, even seeing them every day, the more you use it, the more the students learn, the faster they pick it up. And we were talking earlier that students at that age are just reaching like the peak age for, or almost surpassing it. By the time they leave 6th grade, they're surpassing that age where they just soak it up, where it's their peak learning time for language. So in a perfect world, it would be really awesome to see students more often and to have it be a little bit more connected and fluid. But we are a special at the upper elementary, so it's supposed to be just an introduction to give them enough information to make a choice once they get to the middle school. So
Okay.
Could I just elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Danny said it perfectly, and I appreciate it. The one thing that I would add is that as with many curriculum initiatives that we've undertaken in Merrimack, we are really trying to not be bound automatically by past practice or by the way things currently are. We often take the position, let's develop something that's optimal. And then, as has been the case in the past, we will work to see how that optimal developed program can work with existing schedules, or perhaps could be the driver to consider changes to existing schedules. So sometimes initiatives like this drive other changes, drive other conversations. And so what we don't really ever want to be about in Merrimack is saying, well, this is how it is, and so we'll just fit what we're going to develop into the picture that currently exists. Sometimes it's important to bust the frame. And so we're very early in this process, and so nobody is promising anything. But I'm just saying, in answer to your question and in elaboration of Danny's answer, the value of this initiative is that we have a chance to now include 5 and 6 into a 5-12 scope and sequence and ask those very questions, but not assume a predetermined answer.
Gotcha. So I got the cart a little bit ahead of the horse.
No. I'm just no, not at all. You were asking the right question, and I just wanted to put in another plug for the fact that our answer is always going to try not to be, well, this is how we do it, so this is what the new thing is going to look like because we're going to fit it into this.
Yep.
It's our responsibility to answer your question by trying to expand the frame just a little bit sometimes.
Well, and the reason I ask is I'm very interested in the how that has been working for our students, how the what I would call maybe a hybrid, because you're doing part, does it, because they're Romance languages, is it confusing if they're doing the French and then the Spanish, or is it and once you get, I guess, go down that road a little bit further, I'd be curious to get more feedback on that or what are some things that we can do to bring in language into the lower grades. For example, the school district that I graduated from, they have a Spanish immersion in kindergarten. So I think there's a variety of reasons they have that, but the other question would be, what makes sense for our district to do and how to build upon that, maybe even earlier than 5th grade. So.
Brandy.
So I have a 5th grader and a 6th grader at JMU's, and I, having my older son go through the 5th grade year and now enter into his 6th grade year, I am not even sure how it will end in his 6th grade year, but my understanding is that he and Christian are both taking French currently, and then we'll be doing Spanish in the latter half of the year. I'm not 100% sure that they're retaining what they've learned. I'll use my older son because he went through 5th grade, but what he retained from the beginning of 5th grade now into 6th grade, same language, but how much, because there's that gap. Granted, it was only, a few months, relatively speaking, but there is that significant gap there. So to Cinda's point, because I mean, it was almost like you were reading my mind. If we started earlier in the elementary years to introduce world language, in sort of a way that complemented another core area, they could at least start getting a framework for world language in general, and that this is something to be excited about as they enter into JMU's, that, wow, I get to learn more about this and sort of create that excitement. But even outside of that, for our 5th and 6th graders, would there be any option for them to have a choice, per se, if they're in 5th grade and they know that French is definitively not for them? Could they then, choose in 6th grade to stay focused on a particular language, or have exposure to a new language, through working with, an older student, per se, that's gone through a different language, and can sort of be an introductory experiment, let's say, with an upperclassman of some sort. Just sort of throwing some ideas out there that maybe there's another option to help them retain the information, but also give them some freedom to decide if this is really working for them or not. Because I know that both my 5th grader and 6th grader have a definitive choice already in where they would like to go with language. So I'm assuming they're not alone in that at that age group. So I just throw that out as food for thought.
I'd like to just say quickly, it's exciting to hear how thoughtful you are about world language, and that you do want it in younger grades and to have more exposure. And I'm taking copious notes because we've really only had one introductory meeting so far, and our next one is Monday the 22nd, so we'll have lots to talk about.
Cinda?
All right. It's another one. And I would say, as you're going along this journey and you continue to meet, I know, I think what we offer in this district too is intentional. And when you look at the high school and you look at Arabic and you look at Mandarin and you look at the number of schools that offer that in this state, I think it's a great opportunity for our kids to be in this district, to take advantage of whether it's not only more traditional languages, that the French, the Spanish, Latin, but they also have other opportunities for Arabic and Mandarin. And so along with that, I know Shannon and I have spoken about this before, is that building of excitement for that possibility in the middle school ages, and carrying that through, so there's the excitement for all of the options that are available. And again, I think to Brandy's point, every student has their choice and they may have their reason for picking it, but how do you expose them before they're in the high school to what we offer as it relates to world language? And I would say, that's a common theme that we have across the district because of the transitions from schools. How do you bring forward communication efforts from school to school to school? How do you bring forward and coordinate let's say the language program. It's kids navigate from school to school to school. So I would say, I think that's a topic that requires some discussion and some thought as far as what we do with the curriculum and what we do to try to make sure our kids are aware of the opportunities and how they may help them in the future.
Yeah, I'm just going to play off of that just a little bit. And to that end, I know that we have some kids that will transfer back to the high school from the local charter school that does offer Mandarin in the middle school. So they're already, they're folding back into our Mandarin program for high school. And we know that that's something you're facing on a regular basis as well. But that means that, the ones who stayed, true to Merrimack the whole time are not, as caught up and can't go as far. So I think that's the other thing that might be, stunting a little bit the Mandarin program. So to that end, we just want to make sure we're always, putting what I would call an even playing field for our organic students as well. But when it comes to it, we know that we can't necessarily staff to the 7th and 8th grade at this point. We get that. Arabic, I don't think anyone's transferring in with an Arabic experience. I think we are unique to that end. And Latin, I think, is one that at least when you're talking about French and Spanish, has a foundation relationship. So they definitely don't look at it so distantly as you would an Arabic or a Mandarin in your freshman year. So that's something we really feel very strongly that we are very valuable in having those, especially Mandarin and Arabic, because they are such diverse in separations from the Romance languages, that we want to make sure that they're in a thriving environment to do that. And we know that we've had some graduates really thrive because of that. So I definitely want to make sure that we as a board are helping you, have that foundation to succeed and keeping that open dialogue. So we appreciate it. So are there any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we wish you a great school year. Muy bien. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias.
Anyone take French out here? Buenas noches.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
And now we're on to item number 5, which is the board's message to the superintendent for the 2019-2020 budget preparation. I had everyone's notes, so I tried to get everything in. I hope I did my best. That's why I asked for electronic copies so I could do a side-by-side and make sure that I wasn't missing anything, anything that we wanted to make sure was addressed. So I did my best to consolidate, create a cohesive message, and this is where we are at. For the 2019-2020 budget, we are looking for fiscal prudence while delivering optimal educational outcomes and maintaining safe and highly maintained facilities. We are looking for an operating budget that, if not level funded, is detailed in its need for an increase. Any new spending that is not imperative to delivering optimal educational outcomes and maintaining safe and highly maintained facilities should be considered for a warrant to allow community input. We will continue to be guided by the capital improvement plan for major infrastructure maintenance and investment. We are also aware that we are beginning to see an increase in enrollments at the same slow pace we were experiencing declines, and we would like to understand the staffing strategy for schools and have it presented in a summary that will be easy to share in communications to the community. This is a powerful piece of data, as staff is an impactful part of our budget and are imperative to achieve district goals. The board has had concerns for a number of years of students collectively self-transporting to practices and home games. With the situation of our home games being held outside of Merrimack's high school campus, we would like the district to provide the data for the cost of busing students to participate in sports when they participate off campus. The board would also like to look at the cut list and get a true understanding of the goals and the consequences of not having these items included in the budget. We would like to have a cost-benefit analysis of these items with detail beyond a basic list. Technology needs are constantly addressed in the budget. We would like to see detail on the projected investments and operational outcomes of these investments. We understand the technology will have a mix of new and replacement equipment in the total and would like to see that broken out. We would like to have data on current student-to-computer ratios, current classroom presentation technology, whether it is smart boards or other technology in place, to see where we do not have parity among classrooms. Wi-Fi coverage data will also be valuable to us to evaluate with before and after coverage if the budget was to pass in April. The board sees the following items not as directives for the upcoming operating budget, but rather short-term goals that may need some funding this coming fiscal year to become firm plans for future budgets. The Brentwood property, I put that in quotes, turf fields and other resources that's needed to maintain sports programs, climate optimization plans as presented by Honeywell, tonight actually, especially for the upper floors at MHS where heat rises within the brick facility, and aging infrastructure such as furnaces that may need replacement, and clearly we got a good taste of that this evening. We are committed to improving and evolving communications for both day-to-day operations and community outreach. As resources are needed to do so, please quantify any costs associated with increased communication platforms. In addition, please have a comprehensive communication plan in place to present this content to the voters in such a way we are able to present data and solicit constructive feedback from the community we serve. And I'm hoping I covered everything. Excellent. Thank you. And with that, I pass it over to you with my handwritten typo fix. And hopefully that will give you what you need with your leadership for the budget season. Excellent. Item number 6 is testing lead in drinking water in schools in response to Senate Bill 247, Prevention of Childhood Lead Poisoning. And I turn the mic over to Matt.
Thank you very much. In your packet is a memo that we received from the Department of Environmental Services. Let me just read the first paragraph for you so everybody has an idea of what it entails. New Hampshire DES issued recommendations for voluntary testing of lead in drinking water at all schools and daycares in spring of 2016. So back in 2016, we got a notification from DES saying this is a voluntary program, but we suggest that you look into this and start testing. What they're really looking for is the water that's at the fixtures at the point of use where the kids would be actually ingesting it. On February 8th, 2018, Governor Sununu signed Senate Bill 247, Prevention of Childhood Lead Poisoning. This law requires, among other actions, that all schools and licensed child care facilities test lead in drinking water at all locations where water is available for consumption by children. The first round of testing is required to be completed by July 1st, 2019, and every 5 years thereafter until at least 3 rounds are below the standard. Such testing completed from 2016. So if you looked at the recommendation memo that came out in 2016, and you took the initiative to do the lead testing then because you thought it was important to do at the time, even though it wasn't a mandate or it wasn't a law, those tests will count towards the 2019 mandated test. So back in 2016, we did such. We went to every single faucet, every single water fountain, every single place where water is actually consumed by adults and or children. I think there were probably 85 to 90 different locations, and we did a complete test of lead in those areas. Everything came back normal or just non-existent with the exception of 3 areas. One of them was in the teacher's lounge. One of them was a water fountain in the boys' room at the upper L, and there were 2 more. I don't recall the exact locations. But after that was done, back in 2016, the source of lead in the water is usually from the fixtures, the solder joints, because when you solder copper pipe, you use lead solder that can leach in. So what we did is we replaced those fixtures, those 4 fixtures, and then we did a retest back in 2016, and everything came back clean. So back in 16, before the law is 2019, we did all the testing. We had it done by RPF, who you should know that name. They did a lot of the testing for the mitigation that was done previously. And they have all that information. So I communicated with Department of Environmental Services, and I spoke with Cynthia Clevens from the water treatment. She's a water treatment engineer up at DES, and she wrote me back nice little email, greetings and thank you for completing this comprehensive testing protocol as recommended in 2016. So that was a good thing. And for implementing immediate remedial actions for the 4 locations where levels were elevated. Now that SB 247 is adopted, there's next step to take. So we have to authorize our laboratory, which in that case was Eastern Analytical, to update all their results into the new state-led database that the state is maintaining. So Eastern Analytical has our results from 2016, so they're going to update. They're going to upload all that information into the state database. Part 2 is to communicate the results to parents and guardians, post it on your website, send out an email with all the results, and let everybody know back in 2016. And I think we discussed this at a board meeting, I believe. So we'll refresh it and we'll put it out there. And so we'll post all the results. We'll send emails to everybody that we have emails to have them review the results, and so they can see themselves that everything is clean. And then we have to repeat this every 5 years until at least 3 rounds are below the action threshold. So right now we have nothing as far as any measurable lead in our water, in our schools, at the point of use where kids or adults would ingest it. So we'll post that, get the data uploaded to the DES website, send out a communication to parents, give them a copy of the complete report, and we are compliant with the law in advance of the deadline in 2019.
Excellent. Are there any questions from the board? Seeing none, glad we're on our game and continuing to do so. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are on to item number 7, which we're on the housekeeping part of our program, which is the approval of the October 1st, 2018 minutes. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Made by Cinda. Do I have a second? Seconded by Naomi. Any edits? Cinda and Brandy.
Okay, page 1, line number 32. Board member Guagliumi stated that it would help her have some research, and then I would add regarding the pros and cons, rather than to have some research on what the pros and cons were.
And Brandy, do you have others?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Got a couple
You
more.
bet.
Page 3, line number 106, Board member Guagliumi stated that Merrimack is a very different community than Bedford. And then I would scratch, beginning with was, all the way through students, and replace it to say other considerations such as FAPE, the free and public education, also exists and should be considered. It states in here that it has to do with Bedford's concept of public education, which isn't true. It's more about our particular duties as it relates to public education within our own school district. And then page number 6, line 208, Board member Guagliumi stated she did not recall, what I would like it to read is Board member Guagliumi stated that she did not recall the board publicly vetting the long-term use of the building for the SAU office student services. So just a slight change to make it more clear. And then on page 8, line number 317, where it says encourage innovative and creative approaches to accomplish the district goals. And that's all I have.
Randy?
On page 2, line 48, it says Mrs. Nunez commented that the Blizzard bag was something she was interested and after interested, it should read, in learning more about Blizzard bags relative to the district impact. And wanted to know at what age utilizing one-to-one technology would be beneficial instead of the bag would start being used. It's two different subjects.
Very much. Okay. With that, we'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. We are on to item number 8. Other, is there any correspondence to come before the board? Brandy?
I received an email from a parent at JMU's concerned about the utilization of EpiPens on the upper level of JMU's and how access could be improved to EpiPens for her child.
Thank you. Did you redirect her to the right resource in the district already, or is she still looking for a response from us?
I did redirect her and suggested that she reach out to her teacher as well.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. For correspondence, the board got a letter regarding a screening of a film on PFOAs called The Devil We Know. So it was sent to all of you, and I think I forwarded it to you, Brandy, because it got kicked back. So I'm hoping you got it as well. I did end up going, so I will say that was very interesting. It was about DuPont back in the history of DuPont in Teflon and the PFOAs and PFOSs that were involved with that. So a very interesting documentary and a good dialogue afterward. Is there any other correspondence? Seeing none, are there any comments from the board? I also have one. I know that suburban legend is that we are continuing declining enrollments. And just to let you know, since we first measured our student population this school year, we've already increased 16 students, and 22 of them are at the high school level. So we are actually increasing student enrollments this year. Cinda.
You know, since you brought that up, I think that's a really good point. What I would love to see, and I know I've spoken with Matt about it before and had the breakdown, but I'd like that information publicly, like over the last 10 years, what has the impact to our student enrollment been, and to have that available for the public, because I do know that comes up from time to time, and I think that would be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's just a quick agenda item or if it's what's the best way to...
It's usually part of our budget book is the enrollment history, and also future projections based on things like birth rates and the like. But I know that this is something we're going to keep an eye on, especially with the development of new real estate in town, that, what's the true impact once the facilities open up as well. So I think it's something that we will, as a board, want to, other than the budget, we're going to want to keep an eye on it throughout the year to see what the monthly impact is, because it affects operations if we're projecting for first day and we get an influx, which has happened to us.
Well, and I would say that in the budget book too, I think it's easier to kind of fall within those budget materials, but to kind of pull that out and put that front and center.
Okay.
I don't know. I think that would be helpful. I don't know if anyone feels the same, but there are often questions, and like you had used the word urban legend or not, what's the real reality of that, and where would someone be able to go to quickly get that information if they wanted it?
Sure. Marge, did you have your finger on the button?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, of course, we have another new dynamic going from half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten now, so that's going to make a difference. So let's see if we can pull together some page, because I think a lot of times it needs context. So I'm just thinking just a page of enrollment. I'm not sure. I've got to think about how it might be done, I think.
Yeah. If you could footnote it too, to make it right, the kindergarten, maybe we carve out kindergarten from that, or maybe there's some ways to look at it, but I'd be curious personally to really see that.
Okay. On to item number 9, new business. Is there any new business to come before the board? Seeing none. Committee report. Oh, committee reports number 10. I've got Josh, and I've got Naomi, and I've got Cinda.
Josh is my brother.
Josh is your brother. Hi, sorry,
Yeah.
Chris. I have a cold, remember? I've been sneezing all night.
No, it's fine. You're not, like, everyone does it.
But you're not in trouble, so it's not like your mom yelling
Yeah,
at the wrong kid.
So, this Thursday, the Korean delegation is coming to the high school. They're gonna be I wrote notes for this. They're gonna be giving us a performance, which they usually bring a bunch of drums and like play a Korean song for us, and the marching band will play for them. We usually end up playing their anthem, their national anthem, and then we play our marching band show. Then after that, they're all gonna go around to the classrooms and teach us a little bit about their culture.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And do you want to tell us anything about the Salem Band Show?
The Salem Band Show went really well. We got to interact with a lot of the other bands and learn a lot from it.
Yes, so Merrimack went on first. They did a lovely job. So I was there. It wasn't too cold, so it was great. So excellent. And then Naomi, and then Cinda.
The kindergarten committee, which was a group that got together in order to forward plan and provide information prior to our own initiative, reconvened to provide information to a neighboring district, and we had a wonderful time doing it. It was a great meeting.
Thank you. Cinda.
First of all, there was a safeguard meeting. I don't know if Mark, if you have an update on that. I know that Andy went. I was not able to make this one.
So the big thing that we talked about, we actually had a student guest from the high school. He's a senior, Matt Giambartolome, and he is he's organizing a public information event. I think it's scheduled for November 14th about vaping and the medical impact of vaping on those who do that. And he is doing a great job connecting with community members, and he came to Safeguard to reach out to that group that has big contacts, and he's putting a panel together. This is entirely his initiative through SAD, and he is working hard to have an information night so that the community can better understand the impact, medical and emotional and other impacts of vaping. And so that was a primary part of the meeting on last Thursday. In addition to that, because we're in our 10th year, we just continue to talk about the ways that Merrimack Safeguard can continue viably as an organization, and continue to look for people who will pick up the mantle and continue the good work of Merrimack Safeguard. And so we've talked about efforts to use this final year to really reach out to the community and sort of, for lack of a better word, pass the baton. So that was primarily what we talked about.
Thank you. And then secondly, I attended PERC last week. There were a couple of classes and courses that were brought up. First of all, out of the Success in School and Student Services came the request for a Learning Center Comprehensive for grades 11 and 12. So right now, Success in School is offered in 9th and 10th grades for credit. And this particular offering would provide more structure around enhancing the learning opportunities for students that could benefit from those classes, that would elect to take those classes. The offering being discussed, and again, this is a discussion, not in stone, but the discussions evolved around offering for a full year 1 credit with a pass or fail. And then the second proposal, again, not voted on, was that to change the required course for English. It's from the English department to change the required courses for seniors from 2 semesters of English in the senior year, providing that the 9th, 10th, and 11th grade English classes were successfully completed would be 1 semester of English and then 1 of an elective. So the idea being that this would allow students to better customize their English experience depending on what they would like to accomplish postgraduate. So some of those electives would be around creative writing, film literacy, journalism, public speaking, psychology and literature, philosophy, and truth and logic. Again, giving the student more choices in order to prepare them for the future. Anything I missed on that, Mark,
Excellent
or
job.
stated inaccurately?
You did indeed.
Okay, thank you.
And I did miss the Healthcare Cost Containment Committee because I had a meeting at work I could not get out of. And the highlight of that was they presented on the Solera program, which is a diabetes prevention program for employees, spouses, and retirees. So I'm hopefully getting disseminated to the buildings and offering great benefit. I will go on to item number 11, which is public comments on agenda items. The room is empty, so we will close it. We will take a moment to sign the manifest, and I will entertain a motion to go into non-public session per RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 2, section E. Motion made by Shannon and seconded by Naomi. Brandy, how do you vote? Yeah, it's roll call, sorry.
In favor?
Naomi?
In favor?
Cinda?
In favor.
And I vote in favor. The motion carries 4-0-0. Thank you and good night.